there seems to be a rise in the persecution of journalists in general, and there seems to be a rise of attack on media freedom. Governments are persecuting journalists working in different parts of the world. We had Shireen, for instance, at the West Bank, the American-Palestinian journalist from Al Jazeera that was assassinated by the Israel government. And we see world leaders shying away from holding countries such as Israel to account for the assassination of Shireen. And the only thing that global leaders or the leaders in different parts of the world can say is that we are going to do an investigation, and we are actually calling governments to do thorough investigation. And there is no way where these governments who are actually doing a direct attack on media freedom, there's no way to hold them into account. I mean, even the US failed to hold its own ally, Israel, to account for the assassination of Shireen in the West Bank by the Israeli military. And we're seeing the same thing in the African continent. We're seeing the same thing in Mexico. Particularly now when you're dealing with the reporting on issues of human rights violation, what governments automatically do is then to perceive the media as the enemy of the state. We had such issues as journalists for human rights, for instance, where the project in South Sudan trying to find ways where we can engage government to have a constructive relationship between the media and the government of the day and transform the narrative that media is simply there as an enemy of the state, but also to consider media as a key cornerstone of democracy. So what we then see, it's not only a problem of human rights when journalists are being persecuted, killed and assassinated in different parts of the world. It is actually a direct attack to the core principles of democracy. So that's where, for me, I think we have a major issue. It's not only a human rights issue, but it's also a democratic issue. Because as you would understand, without the watchdog, which is the media, without the cornerstone of democracy, which is the media, are we not going to begin seeing a decline in democratic governments in different parts of the world? Already in the African continent, we are battling with issues of democracy. I mean, in recent elections in Uganda, the government of Uganda decided to shut down internet, and close down that country from access to information. And no one knew for more than 2 weeks what was currently happening in Uganda until the government decided to declare Museveni as the victor in the elections, and now everyone had access to network and internet. And the government, global community failed to hold that leader into account. So those are some of the issues that we're dealing with. And when journalists are raising such issues and asking such critical questions in defense of democratic principle, in defense of media freedom, in defense of human rights, they are not protected by the global community. So those are some of the challenges that we're experiencing as human rights defenders and human rights journalists that we work with.
Yeah, and you mentioned also the access of internet. How do you see that affecting this?
When governments decide to weaponize internet and have an autonomy to decide when the citizens can have access to information and when they can have access to information, to as those who are engaged in human rights, as human rights defenders and human rights journalists, it's actually a direct attack to democracy itself. Access to information is one of the key things that drive our societies and drive our communities. When the government can have autonomy to decide when citizens can have access to information and when they can't have access to information, that means we're not living in democratic societies. In fact, we're living under authoritarian regimes. So for me, I think those are the most key important things that are of critical importance when engaging in spaces such as Web Summit. How do we urge and how do we lobby those in the innovation and technology industry to consider devising alternative ways to have access to information and to have access to internet when government, particularly in authoritarian regimes such as Uganda, such as Rwanda, can offer alternative ways of access to information and access to internet, so that when those governments decide to be repressive, we can then have an alternative ways to still have information out there, and the world should be able to know what is currently happening when the government is basically inflicting injustice against its own citizens in different parts of the African continent, in the Middle East, and in the globe as a whole.
Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you.